What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors walks into a studio thinking he's promoting a film, only to be ambushed by a host with a different agenda? It was supposed to be just another segment on Good Morning America till it turned into a PR disaster, a newsroom standoff, and a headline-grabbing moment that ended with security on set and Nicolas Cage walking off live TV. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment because this story spirals fast. The Good Morning America green room hummed with its usual morning chaos. Hairspray hung in the air. Coffee cups clinked and producers darted from hallway to hallway. Nicolas Cage sat in a corner, calm and focused, flipping through a set of handwritten notes. He wasn't there to make waves, just to promote his latest film and highlight a charity close to his heart. His publicist, Miranda Torres, kept a close eye on the door, phone in one hand, and nerves barely concealed. For the last time, she told a junior producer he's only discussing the film and his Veterans Foundation. No gossip, no past drama. We're clear. The assistant nodded, totally clear. George is excited to keep it light. But George Stephanopoulos had other plans. In a separate office down the hall, George wasn't reviewing press kits or film clips. He was combing through a thick file of tabloids, court docs, and financial records. Headlines about Cage's tax troubles. Notes on his high-profile divorces. Career low points, highlighted, underlined. This is the real story, George muttered, flipping pages. People want authenticity, not another PR fluff segment. His assistant, visibly tense, tried to intervene. Sir, Miranda was very clear. They came here under specific conditions. George didn't even glance up. Since when do we let publicists write our scripts? This is Good Morning America, not a red carpet special. 20 minutes before going live, Miranda knocked on George's door and froze when she saw the mess of tabloid clippings on his desk. "We had an agreement," she said, voice sharp. George didn't flinch. "We'll let the conversation evolve naturally. Mr. Cage is doing this as a favor. We came here in good faith. If you ambush him, that reflects on you." George finally looked up, smile gone cold. "Let me explain how journalism works. We don't negotiate truth. If Mr. Cage isn't prepared for tough questions, maybe he shouldn't be doing interviews." Miranda's reply was cool, but pointed. "There's a line between journalism and provocation. Don't cross it." Back in the green room, Nicolas Cage adjusted his tie in the mirror, still exuding the calm before a storm. "You ready?" Miranda asked. Masking her concern, Cage didn't blink. "Always. That's what this business teaches you, adaptability." He paused. "You think George is planning something?" Miranda hesitated. "Let's just say, he's more eager than usual." The stage lights hit hard as Nicolas walked onto the set. George was already seated at the desk, eyes scanning notes, though not the ones Cage expected. The countdown began. Cameras rolled. Smiles switched on. "Good morning," George began, voice honeyed. "Joining me now is Academy Award-winning actor Nicolas Cage." "Thanks for having me, George. Always a pleasure." George didn't waste time. "Let's talk about your new film, but first, you've had quite the ride in Hollywood, haven't you?" Cage didn't flinch. "Every artist has highs and lows. That's the nature of this business." "But your lows," George said, leaning in, "have been very public. Financial problems, legal battles, some questionable roles. Would you call that poor judgment or just survival?" A pause. The crew went still. Miranda stepped forward off camera. Cage looked George squarely in the eye. "You want to make this personal?" he said, his voice low but firm. "Let's be honest about your motives then, George." The air turned electric, and from that moment on, things unraveled fast. The studio fell into a sudden hush. Camera operators exchanged uncertain glances. From the wings, Miranda stepped forward, tension carved into her features. Nicholas leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing, the heat draining from his face. "George, I thought we were here to talk about my current work, my new project. The Veteran Outreach Program," he said coolly. George barely looked up from his notepad. "We'll get to that," he said, flipping a page. "But our viewers are curious about you, Nicholas, the real you. You've been in the headlines for more than just your film's multiple marriages, eccentric purchases, legal drama." Nicholas's voice cut through like a knife. "I think you're confused about the nature of this interview." There was an edge to his tone, subtle but unmistakable. Fans of his films would recognize it instantly. George's eyes lit up, sensing an opening. "Come on, Nicholas, you're a public figure. These are fair questions. Don't your fans deserve transparency?" The air thickened. A pause pulsed in the silence. Nicholas shifted, his posture sharpening. For a flicker of a second, that famous intensity crackled across his features, lightning behind gathering storm clouds. "What I think," he said slowly, "is that there's a difference between journalism and exploitation. And right now, I'm trying to figure out which one this is." George's smile wavered for half a beat before returning, tighter this time. He leaned forward, treating the pushback not as a warning, but an invitation. "Exploitation is a strong word, Nicholas," he said. "I'm just asking what any responsible journalist would ask. For example, you allegedly filed for bankruptcy. Yet you continued making ... curious purchases. A pyramid, shrunken heads, a private island. How do you reconcile that with reportedly owing millions to the IRS?" The camera caught Nicholas's jaw tightened. Behind the scenes, Miranda was signaling furiously toward the control booth. George's producer, meanwhile, looked smug, clearly savoring the drama. George Nicholas said quietly, "Let me stop you right there." His voice dropped into that iconic slow-burn register. "First of all, Live never filed for bankruptcy. That's not opinion, that's a fact." He leaned forward. "Second, my finances, my purchases, my personal life, none of that was part of the agreement. You're out of bounds." George flipped his notes with performative flair. "But Nicholas, when you owe taxpayers money, doesn't that make your spending a matter of public concern? I've got court documents here showing you spent $200,000 on a rare comic book while under IRS scrutiny documents." Nicholas arched an eyebrow. "What documents?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Did you hire a private investigator to dig through my records? Because that would be interesting." George hesitated. His confidence slipped, if only slightly. "These are publicly available court filings," he muttered. "No, George. They're not," Nicholas said flatly. "Court filings show liens, not specific purchases." "So where exactly did you get that detail about the comic book, or the island, or anything else you're throwing at me?" George shuffled his papers, the veneer cracking. "Our research team is ... thorough." "Your research team or your tabloid connections," Nicholas pressed. "Because it sounds like someone's selling you information they had no right to sell." The audience, once entertained, now watched with growing unease. Something in George's tone had shifted from probing to prying. "Always," stirred among the crew. George tried to recover. "Nicholas, I think you're deflecting. These are legitimate concerns. You've made questionable financial choices, yet you still live extravagantly. Extravagantly." Nicholas's voice rose just enough to freeze the room. "Do you know what I did last month, George?" he said, each word measured. "I visited wounded veterans at Walter Reed. No press, no cameras. I brought care packages, paid for them myself, because they deserve more than this." He gestured broadly at the set circus. He didn't wait for applause. "But that's not the story you want to tell, is it?" George's producer was now waving frantically from behind the camera. George ignored him. "That's commendable, Nicholas," he said, "but it still doesn't excuse financial irresponsibility." Nicholas stood halfway up, gripping the arms of his chair. "Let me tell you something about responsibility. I've employed hundreds of people, crews, assistants, drivers, security, housekeepers, people with families, people who count on the work I create. When I take a role of in a movie, you want to make I'm not just getting a paycheck. I'm keeping people employed." George saw his grip on the conversation slipping and lunged. "Then let's talk about those roles," he said. "The Wicker Man, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. Films many critics called, well, career lows. Were you?" George leaning in, casual but cutting. "So, are you just taking any role for the paycheck now?" The air snapped taut. A beat of stunned silence. Nicholas locked eyes with George, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nicholas coldly. "Did you just insult my work, George?" George defensive. "I'm asking about your artistic choices." Nicholas sharply. "No, you're parroting lazy criticism from people who've never spent a day on a set. You're quoting bloggers who confuse hot takes with insight?" George steadying himself. "Well, critics and audiences weren't kind to your last few films." Nicholas's voice sharpening. "George, have you ever acted? Ever stood under a blazing light in winter cold or desert heat? Tried to bring a character to life for someone else's escape?" George quietly. "I don't need to be an actor to evaluate a performance." Nicholas firm. "You do if you want to. Judge it fairly. I give everything to every role, studio or indie. That's what commitment looks like." George pressing. "Still, you have to admit, some choices must have been about money more than vision." Nicholas leaning forward, voice low. "Let me tell you something about vision. Some of the best work I've done was in films no one campaigned for. Real artists don't chase prestige, they chase truth." George, "So financial pressure had nothing to do with it." Nicholas, "That's none of your business. My art, my process, my finances, not yours to dissect." George flinched. "Amateur," that one word had hit harder than expected. George bristling. "I've been in journalism longer than you've been in film. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel laureates." Nicholas, "Then why are you ambushing guests like this? Did you ask those presidents about their credit card bills or insult their career moves? Or is this how you treat only entertainers?" George, snapping, "This is different. You're not a head of state, sure, an entertainer. Nicholas, I'm an artist and a human being. Something your questions seem to ignore." Cameras rolled. Producers panicked off screen. George, however, couldn't back down. George biting, "Respect is earned. And frankly, some of your behavior hasn't made that easy." Silence. Nicholas, "Icy. My behavior." He stood, voice controlled but laced with fire. Nicholas, "Tell me, George. What behavior exactly? The fact that I work nonstop, that I fund charities, that I don't fit your neat little box of how a celebrity should act." George cornered, but doubling down. The outbursts, the strange interviews, the lifestyle choices. Nicholas, dangerously quiet. "You mean I don't give canned answers? That I'm passionate? That I don't smile through disrespect?" George raising papers. "It's all documented sources," said Nicholas, cutting him off. "Sources? You mean gossip sites? Tabloids that spin humanity into clickbait? That's your standard now." George flustered. "There are multiple reports, Nicholas, multiple piles of trash. Maybe you want to talk erratic. Let's talk this. You invited me under false pretenses. I spent this entire interview lobbing attacks instead of asking about the work we agreed to discuss." George tense. "I'm doing my job." Nicholas, "No, you're abusing your platform. There's a line between journalism and harassment, and you just sprinted past it. George's face flushed. His producer was frantically signaling behind the cameras. George, I resent that. Nicholas, I don't care what you resent. You've spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television with gossip and innuendo. Us, not journalism. A hit job. George Weekly. These are legitimate questions for a public figure. Nicholas stepped closer to the desk, each word deliberate. Nicholas then asked them with integrity. Or don't ask at all. Asterisk, you haven't asked me a single question. About my craft, my upcoming film, or my work with veterans, Nicholas said, his voice controlled but clipped. All you've done is try to humiliate me with tabloid trash. The public has a right to know. George countered. No. Nicholas snapped. The public has a right to truth, not character assassination disguised as journalism. He leaned forward. This was supposed to be a conversation about meaningful work. Instead, you turned it into a smear campaign. George, grasping for control, tried to jab again. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe interviews aren't. For you? The words hung there, acidic. Nicholas stared at him. Slowly, coldly. Tough questions. He repeated, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Fine, George, let me ask you a few. The studio held its breath. How does it feel knowing your viewers are watching you bully a guest? How does it feel knowing you've torched whatever credibility you had, that you'll be remembered not for journalism, but for this pathetic excuse of an ambush? George's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Even the cameras hummed louder in the silence. Nicholas continued, his voice growing steadier. Steel. In every word. You want to question my behavior? Here it is. When someone shows me disrespect, I speak up. When someone tries to ambush me, I don't sit back and smile. When someone mistakes me for weak, I correct them. George fumbled. Maybe we should take a commercial break. Oh, now you want a break. Nicholas scoffed. After you spent half an hour trying to shred my reputation on national TV? No, George. We finish this right here, right now. He placed both hands on the desk and leaned in, commanding the screen. You brought me on to discuss my work and my advocacy. Instead, you questioned my personal life, my finances, my integrity. You did everything but show me basic human respect. George, sweating under the lights, croaked out, Nicholas, I'm just doing my job. No, Nicholas said sharply. Your job is to inform, to challenge with fairness, not to spit gossip. Your job is to be a journalist, George. And today, you failed. Security edged closer behind the cameras. Miranda, the producer, was already on her phone. Nicholas straightened. Calm. Final? You know what? I've given you more than you deserve. I came here in good faith to talk about something meaningful, and you turned it into a circus. Wait, where are you going? George asked, panic rising in his voice. I'm going somewhere, people. Know the difference between journalism and harassment, Nicholas replied, removing his mic with slow, deliberate fingers. Somewhere my work is respected, not mocked. Where I'm treated like a human being, not a headline. George made one last plea. Nicholas, wait. We can start over. We can talk about the film. Nicholas turned one last time. No, George. You don't get to start over after revealing your true self. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's dedicated his life to art and service. And you chose petty? You chose spectacle. That's on you. And with that, Nicolas Cage walked off the set of Good Morning America, leaving George Stephanopoulos staring into dead air, lone, exposed, and silenced by the consequences of his own choices. Security escorted Nicholas toward the exit. The studio was still. The damage was done. George finally looked down at his notes. and realized the difference between tough journalism and a hit job. But by then, it was too late to save the interview or his own name. So there it is, how Nicolas Cage dismantled a journalist's facade. Live on morning television in one of the most stunning walk-offs ever broadcast. What do you think George should have done differently? Subscribe, comment, let's talk.